on the snow-covered streets of Pine Ridge, where every heartbeat echoed against the frozen wind, a forgotten hero fought for more than just survival. He fought for redemption. Welcome to Vale Marks, a place where we believe every scar holds a story, and every story holds a light. As you journey through this powerful true tale of valor, Claire, and Noah, remember, the greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. As Nelson Mandela once said, watch till the very end. You will find a lesson that may stay with you forever. If you feel touched, please leave a comment, subscribe, and be part of our first 1,000 souls, lifting Vale Marks higher. Pine Ridge, Montana, was drowning under a curtain of white. It was the kind of morning when the whole town seemed to hold its breath, as snow piled high against doors and the trees groaned under the weight of winter's fury. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, and even the sturdiest ranchers stayed indoors, warming their hands by crackling fires. Yet at the Pine Ridge Animal Rescue Shelter, there was no time for quiet reflection. A thunderous crash split the air, cutting through the howling wind like a gunshot. Inside the reinforced section of the shelter, where the most difficult animals were kept, chaos erupted. Staff dropped clipboards and scrambled toward the noise, hearts hammering in their chests. Valor, the massive Pitbull, had once again broken free from his confinement. His body slammed against the battered steel door of his kennel, the hinges groaning in protest. His snarling echoed through the narrow hallway, a deep, primal sound that made even the bravest volunteers hesitate at the threshold. Snow whirled in through a cracked window, dusting the floor with a thin layer of white. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, the scene looked like something out of a nightmare. "Get the tranquilizer!" Martha Newman, the shelter's manager, screamed over the din. She grabbed for the walkie-talkie, clipped to her belt with shaking fingers. Her voice, usually calm and commanding, cracked under the pressure. "Now, before someone gets hurt," across the room, Dr. Margaret Wilson, the shelter's 80-year-old volunteer veterinarian, raised a hand, firm, steady, and defiant. "Wait," she said, her voice low but carrying through the panic like a thread of steel. "Give him a moment." Martha stared at her, aghast. "A moment? Margaret, he's going to tear the place apart." But Dr. Wilson didn't move. She kept her gaze locked on the Pitbull, who now stood, panting heavily, in the center of the room. Valor's chest heaved with every breath, his powerful muscles taut under a coat dulled from neglect and fear. Snow clung to his paws, melting into small puddles around him. The staff stood frozen, caught between fight and flight, watching the drama unfold. It would have been easy, so easy, to label Valor as dangerous, to see only the slashing teeth, the wild eyes, the sheer mass of him. The media had taught them all too well. Pitbulls were trouble, a ticking time bomb in fur. But Dr. Wilson saw something different. She looked beyond the bared teeth and the bloodshot eyes. She saw the tremble in Valor's legs, the way his ears pinned back against his skull, the frantic flicker of his gaze around the room, not looking for a target, but for an exit, a way out, a lifeline. She saw not rage, but terror, not aggression, but anguish. "Someone hurt him," she said quietly, almost to herself. Someone taught him fear before he ever had a chance to know love. Valor let out a low, broken growl, not a threat, but a warning to stay away. His whole body vibrated with confusion, a soul trapped between instinct and memory. His mouth opened slightly, and a thin string of drool dangled from his trembling jaw. Slowly, very slowly, Dr. Wilson crouched down, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. The staff watched, holding their breath, as if one sudden movement might tip the balance. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, her words nearly lost in the storm's howl. "No one's going to hurt you here." Valor's nostrils flared. For a moment, he seemed poised to spring, either into attack or into flight. No one could tell. But then, something extraordinary happened. His tail, stiff as a board, gave a single, hesitant wag. It was barely perceptible. A twitch, really, But Dr. Wilson saw it, and in that instant, she knew. This was no monster standing before them. This was a warrior, a soldier battered by battles no one else could see, still carrying the invisible wounds of a past too cruel to imagine. "Lower the dart guns," she commanded firmly. Martha hesitated, then reluctantly nodded to the security team, who eased their fingers off the triggers. Valor's body sagged, as if the tension draining from the humans around him allowed him to release his own. He stumbled back toward the broken kennel, his massive frame quivering, and lay down heavily against the shattered door, curling into a tight ball like a child seeking comfort. Snowflakes danced in the air around him, tiny ghosts in the sterile shelter light. Somewhere deep in the building, the radio crackled with static, a local news update about the worsening blizzard, but no one in the shelter moved. All eyes remained locked on Valor, on the battered creature who had just revealed more about his soul in 5 minutes than most humans did in a lifetime. In that silent, heavy moment, the story truly began. Not the story of a dangerous dog who needed to be put down, not the story of a lost cause, but the story of a survivor fighting for his place in a world that had already tried to erase him. The question hung thick in the air, unspoken but alive in every mind. Was Valor truly a threat? Or was he the kind of hero the world so often overlooks, bruised and broken, but still burning with the stubborn, aching need to belong? Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the fragile beginnings of trust blooming inside a run-down shelter in Pine Ridge. Inside, though, for the first time in a long, long while, there was hope. And hope, even in the smallest measure, could be enough to change everything. Claire Mitchell had once known how to fix broken things. She had spent years in uniform, moving quietly through military hospitals and war-torn camps, stitching together bodies and patching up battered minds as a combat trauma psychologist. She understood the language of fear, the mechanics of grief. She had given soldiers tools to climb back from the edges of despair, but no training in the world could have prepared her for the day she lost Jack. Jack Mitchell had been a rescue specialist, a man whose steady hands and steady heart had saved more lives than Claire could count. He had been her anchor during the dark nights, when her own work felt too heavy, too hopeless. And then, during what should have been a routine mission stateside, a sudden explosion, a collapsed building, a radio call that ended halfway through a sentence. Jack was gone. That was 2 years ago. Claire still woke up some nights with his name on her lips, reaching for a man who would never come home. And Noah, their sweet, talkative, dimpled boy, had gone silent the day the folded flag was placed into his mother's trembling hands. At 6 years old, Noah hadn't spoken a word in over 7 months. No laughter, no bedtime questions, no tantrums over broccoli or bedtime, just wide, solemn eyes and a silence so thick it seemed to fill every corner of their small house on the outskirts of Pine Ridge. Claire tried everything: therapy, play groups, even sign language classes. Desperate to bridge the chasm that grief had opened between them, nothing worked. Some days, she swore she could hear her own heart cracking under the weight of it all, a slow, splintering sound that she carried with her into every sleepless night. The house that had once been filled with Jack's booming laugh and Noah's delighted squeals now echoed with quiet. It was the kind of silence that didn't just fill a space, it claimed it, planted roots deep into the walls, the floorboards, the very bones of the place. Claire, too, had changed in ways she barely understood. The woman who had once walked into war zones without flinching, now startled at loud noises. She kept the windows locked, the doors bolted, double-checked the oven and the light switches before bed. At night, she sometimes sat awake in the kitchen, staring at nothing, her breathing shallow and her chest tight with invisible weight. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Her former colleagues would have said, clinically, they would have handed her pamphlets and referrals and coping strategies, but Claire had spent a career helping others navigate the minefields of trauma. She recognized every symptom as it rooted itself inside her, and she knew all too well. Diagnosing herself was one thing, healing herself was something else entirely, so she didn't talk about it. Not to friends, not to family, not to the well-meaning neighbor who dropped off casseroles and patted her hand with pity in her eyes. Instead, Claire folded her grief into neat little corners of her life, tucking it away between work shifts at the local pharmacy and endless loads of laundry that somehow still piled up despite the absence of a third voice in the house. When the opportunity to volunteer at the Pine Ridge Animal Rescue Shelter came up, Claire took it without hesitation. She told herself it was to help the animals, to give back to the community, to fill the empty hours. But the truth was simpler and harder. Claire needed something to save. Because she didn't know how to save herself, the shelter became her refuge. A place where brokenness was expected, even welcomed, where the animals carried their own histories of pain and abandonment, and no one looked twice at trembling hands or distant eyes. Martha, the shelter director, welcomed her with a warm smile and a clipboard full of tasks: clean water bowls, fold blankets, walk the dogs, feed the cats. Simple things. Manageable things. No one asked about the shadows in Claire's gaze, or why she flinched when the gate slammed shut too loudly in the wind. Noah came with her sometimes, sitting quietly on a worn bench near the kennels, his small fingers busy with a battered sketchpad and a handful of broken crayons. He never spoke, but he watched the animals with a solemn intensity, as if searching for something he couldn't yet name. Claire told herself she was helping him too, giving him a place to see life again, even if he couldn't yet find his own voice. But deep down she feared it wasn't enough. Sometimes she would catch Noah tracing endless circles on his paper, his head bowed low, the colors bleeding together into dark spirals. She knew those spirals well. She had seen them drawn in journal entries by soldiers, too scarred to speak. They were the maps of lost souls, spinning in grief with no clear path out. And so, every evening after their shift at the shelter, Claire and Noah returned to their too quiet house. They made peanut butter sandwiches neither of them ate, listened to the radio in the background instead of talking, and slept in separate rooms, haunted by the same ghosts, two fractured hearts under one broken roof. Claire had long ago stopped hoping for miracles. Hope, she had learned, could be a dangerous thing, setting you up for a fall that hurt worse than any battlefield wound. But life, it seemed, had not yet finished writing her story. A storm was coming, not just the blizzard swirling through the mountains, but a force greater and more unexpected than she could ever imagine. And it would arrive not in the form of therapy or medication or time. It would arrive on four legs, with a battered body, and a soul every bit as wounded as her own. And somehow, against all odds, Claire Mitchell and her silent little boy were about to meet the only creature in Pine Ridge broken enough and brave enough to find them in the dark. It had been one of those mornings that seemed cursed from the moment the sun broke over the frozen hills. Claire's babysitter had called just after dawn, voice tight with apology. Her car had skidded into a ditch on the ice, and there was no way she could make it. Claire had no choice. Noah would have to come with her to the shelter. She bundled him into layers of clothing, wrapped a thick scarf around his small face, and drove carefully through the whiteout. At the shelter, the other volunteers greeted her with sympathetic smiles but didn't question the silent boy clutching his battered sketchpad like a shield. "Just keep him in the break room," Martha suggested gently. "It's quiet back there." Claire nodded and settled Noah at a small table with crayons and a juice box before hurrying off to handle the morning rounds. She checked the food supplies, made sure the heaters in the kennels were still running, and scrubbed down a few cages. She was halfway through filling water bowls when she noticed the silence had deepened unnaturally. The usual background sounds, the bark of restless dogs, the occasional clatter of a food dish, seemed muted, almost expectant. A prickling sensation climbed up Claire's spine. Dropping the water jug, she spun around and ran toward the break room. But Noah was not there. His crayons were scattered across the table, the sketchpad abandoned on the floor. Panic clamped down hard in her chest. "Noah?" she called, her voice shrill with fear. No answer. She tore down the hall, heart hammering against her ribs, scanning every shadowed corner. Then she rounded the final bend and froze. across the wide, dim kennel aisle, she spotted him, Noah, sitting cross-legged directly in front of Valor's cage. Claire's blood turned to ice. Valor, the pit bull no one could touch, no one could even approach, without risking a violent reaction, the dog who had shattered his cage door in a fit of rage barely a week ago, the dog whose intake file was thick with warnings, double underlined, and her tiny son, broken, silent Noah, was sitting just inches from that steel mesh door, his small fingers resting calmly on his lap, his face tilted upward in quiet fascination. Claire opened her mouth to scream, to run, to throw herself between them, but something in the air stopped her, something in the way Valor sat. The pit bull was utterly still, his massive head lowered so that his chin almost brushed the concrete floor. His scarred ears were drooped low in submission, and his entire body language was folded inward, not in aggression, but in something heartbreakingly soft. Tears, real, unmistakable tears, clung to the corners of Valor's deep brown eyes. The feral growl Claire expected never came. There was no bark, no lunge at the mesh, no flashing teeth. Only a great, trembling sigh from the battered animal, as if he was exhaling years of pain into the cold morning air. And Noah, her silent, unreachable Noah, lifted one small hand and pressed it gently against the cage door, palm flat. For a suspended, breathless moment, Valor stayed frozen. Then, slowly, almost reverently, he leaned forward until the tip of his wet nose barely touched the boy's hand through the steel. Claire's throat closed tight. Tears blurred her vision, and then she heard it, a sound so soft she almost doubted it. Noah's voice, fragile, rusted with disuse, but unmistakably real. "Good dog," he whispered. 2 words, 2 simple, miraculous words. Claire clapped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob, but it was too late. Valor's dark eyes flicked up, catching her in the doorway. For a split second, Claire feared the magic would break, that the pit bull would remember his fear, his rage, and snap. But Valor only blinked, slow and solemn, and then returned his full attention to Noah. It was as if, in that single heartbeat of recognition, a bridge had been built between 2 fractured souls, one human, one canine, both too battered by loss to trust the world easily, and both too desperate for connection to turn away when it was finally offered. Claire moved cautiously closer, her boots scraping against the concrete floor. Noah didn't flinch. Valor didn't growl. She crouched down beside her son, her own hand trembling as she reached out to steady him. Noah turned to her, his wide brown eyes shining with something she hadn't seen in months. Wonder, hope. "He's not scary," Noah said, louder this time, his voice gaining strength. "He's just sad." Claire couldn't breathe past the lump in her throat. Sad? Yes. That was it, wasn't it? Valor wasn't a monster. He wasn't dangerous in the way everyone assumed. He was a mirror, a reflection of every hurt, every betrayal, every ounce of loneliness that both she and Noah carried inside them. And somehow, without words, without training, without walls, her little boy had seen straight into the heart of the creature everyone else had given up on. Claire didn't know what would happen next. She didn't know how she would convince Martha to let Valor stay, or whether the shelter's protocols could be bent for an animal with such a volatile history. But for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel utterly powerless. She saw a future shimmering faintly at the edges of her fear, one wounded heart reaching out to another, one small, miraculous voice rising from the silence, and an old, battle-scarred pit bull sitting perfectly still, guarding that fragile spark with the quiet devotion of a knight kneeling before his king. The atmosphere inside the shelter shifted after that morning. Whispers followed Claire wherever she went, curious, skeptical, sometimes hostile. Volunteers glanced at Noah with a mixture of pity and alarm, at Valor with unconcealed fear. Despite all that, Claire couldn't shake what she had seen. Neither could Dr. T.A. Wilson. They sat together in the cramped, overheated office, papers spread between them, the coffee in their mugs going cold. "I want to try a structured rehabilitation program," Claire said quietly, Her voice didn't tremble, but her hands did. Doctor. Doc. Wilson tapped a pen against his notepad. Supervised sessions only. Strict protocol. Of course, Claire agreed instantly. I'll handle it personally, always under observation. They outlined a plan, short, controlled interactions, no physical contact. Noah would be allowed to engage through speaking, reading, drawing, simple, non-threatening gestures to build trust. It was risky. Everyone knew that, but doing nothing felt riskier now. The proposal was presented to the shelter's board at the next meeting. It did not go well. You're suggesting we let a known aggressive pitbull, a pitbull who already has a bite record, mind you, interact with a 6-year-old child? Barked Miss Halverson, the head of the board, slamming his hand on the table. You're out of your mind, muttered another. Insurance would never cover it. Someone else added grimly, if something happens, if we don't give him a chance, he's dead anyway. Claire interrupted, more fiercely than she intended. We euthanize him based on fear, not fact. Martha Newman, sitting stiffly at the end of the table, drummed her fingers against her notepad. She had seen too much over the years. Dogs who fooled people with a wag of the tail, then turned savage in an instant. But then her gaze flicked to Noah, sitting silently on a chair outside the glass-paneled room, tracing his finger in slow circles on his sketchpad. Martha sighed heavily. 2 weeks, she said gruffly. He gets 2 weeks? Strict conditions? No physical contact. If Valor shows anything, any sign of aggression, we put him down immediately. No debates, the board grumbled, but the decision was made. Claire thanked them, voice thick with emotion, but as she left the meeting room, Noah running ahead to hug her waist. A new fear coiled inside her chest, because now the stakes weren't just about Valor. Now they were about Noah too. And Claire was terrified that by trying to heal one wounded soul, she might shatter another. The first day of the program began under the watchful eyes of half the shelter staff. Claire led Noah into the empty common area, where Valor was already waiting inside a reinforced kennel. The pit bull's entire body language shifted the moment he saw Noah, the way his muscles relaxed, his ears flattened, his tail gave one tentative wag. Noah sat cross-legged on the mat just outside the enclosure, clutching a worn paperback. He cleared his throat shyly. This is the Velveteen Rabbit, he said, voice trembling but audible. It's about stuff that's real. And he began to read. Claire sat a few feet away, pretending to jot down notes but unable to tear her gaze away from the scene unfolding in front of her. Valor listened intently, head cocked slightly, as Noah's voice grew steadier with every page. Sometimes the pit bull would whimper quietly at a sad part or wag his tail at a funny bit, reacting more tenderly than any human audience. After reading time, Noah pulled out a crayon drawing he had made at home, a bright, slightly crooked portrait of Valor, with a big, happy smile and a blue collar. He held it up to the kennel. For you, he said simply. Valor pressed his nose against the bars, as if trying to smell the colorful paper. Each day followed a similar pattern. Noah would bring a new book or drawing. He would sit outside Valor's kennel and talk about small things. His favorite ice cream flavor, the raccoon he once saw in their backyard, his memories of building forts with his dad before the world turned upside down. And Valor listened. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He didn't growl. He listened, as if every word mattered more than oxygen to everyone else watching. It seemed like a miracle. To Claire, it felt like a dangerous dream. At night, when Noah was asleep, she lay awake, haunted by images she couldn't silence. What if Valor snapped? What if Noah reached through the bars too far one day? What if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, gambling not just with a dog's life, but with the fragile heart of the boy she loved more than anything in this world? PTSD had taught her to expect the worst, to brace for every joyful moment to end in catastrophe. Her husband's sudden death in a rescue mission had only solidified that lesson, that happiness was a trick, a fleeting, cruel mirage. Yet, even as fear gnawed at her sanity, Claire couldn't deny what was happening. She could see it in Noah's eyes, brighter now, more alive. She could see it in the way he slept more peacefully, without nightmares wrenching him from dreams. She could feel it in the way he reached for her hand without hesitation, instead of shrinking into himself like before. And she could see it in Valor, in the softening of a gaze once hardened by terror and pain, in the gentle thumps of his tail whenever Noah entered the room. Healing, Claire realized, didn't look the way she had always imagined. It wasn't tidy or safe. It was wild, uncertain, terrifying, and incredibly, unspeakably beautiful. She had to believe in it, even if it meant believing against every protective instinct screaming in her blood. Because sometimes, when two broken things found each other, against all odds, they didn't create more brokenness. Sometimes they built something new, something whole. And for the first time in a long, long while, Claire dared to hope. The days grew longer, colder. Outside, the winds whispered through the bare trees, but inside the shelter, something tender had begun to bloom. Claire watched each session between Noah and Valor, with a heart suspended somewhere between fear and awe. Each moment felt like a small defiance against the darkness that had swallowed their lives for too long. Then, one gray afternoon, everything changed. Claire was helping Noah pack up his drawings when the shelter's front door creaked open. A man stood there, hunched against the biting wind. His skin was pale, stretched too thin across sharp cheekbones, and he wore a battered army jacket several sizes too big. His cane tapped softly against the floor as he shuffled toward the desk. Martha, who rarely softened for strangers, immediately rose to greet him. Claire only caught fragments of their conversation at first, the man asking about a Pitbull with a scarred ear, his voice raspy but urgent. Something in the way he said it made Claire's stomach tighten. Within minutes, the stranger was standing in front of Valor's enclosure. He didn't speak at first. He just knelt, painfully slow, until he was at eye level with the Pitbull, who now watched him with cautious curiosity. Then the man whispered, "You made it, buddy," Valor whined, a low, soft sound, unlike anything Claire had ever heard from him before. His entire body quivered as he pressed his nose to the gate. Desperate, yearning, Claire approached slowly, Noah clinging to her side. The man turned his head, and for the first time, Claire met his gaze, eyes clouded not just by age, but by something deeper, heavier. "I'm Ben Carter," he said hoarsely. "Former 9 handler, Bravo unit. Retired now. More like broken, really." Claire introduced herself cautiously, her mind racing. Ben's voice cracked as he continued, eyes never leaving Valor. "That dog," he said, nodding at the Pitbull, "saved a lot of men, including a stubborn fool named Jacob Mitchell." Claire's breath caught painfully in her chest. Jacob Mitchell. Her husband. The name tasted like salt and steel on her tongue. 6 years ago, Jacob had gone into a collapsed mining shaft to help trapped workers. Only a handful had made it out alive. He never talked much about that day, just said it wasn't his story to tell. Ben seemed to read the questions burning in her eyes. "It wasn't just the miners," he explained, voice breaking. "Our team was deployed for a search and rescue op when the second collapse happened. It should have buried everyone under there, but that dog, Valor, found a narrow air pocket, pushed Jacob back toward a safe tunnel, took the hit when the ceiling gave way." Ben's hand trembled as he wiped at his eyes. "I thought he died that day. We all did. Never saw him again after the dust settled. Somebody must have picked him up. Maybe he got lost or dumped. But God help me, I never forgot him." Claire staggered backward slightly, struggling to breathe. All these months, all these years, she had lived with a heavy guilt she couldn't explain. Jacob had died months later, in another rescue attempt, not crushed by debris, but in a quiet hospital room, after an infection took root in old wounds never fully healed. She had buried him with honors. She had mourned him with dignity, but deep down she had always felt a gnawing shame, as if she hadn't been enough, hadn't been there, hadn't saved him when it mattered. And now, standing in front of her, was living proof that someone had, not a man, not a medic, a pit bull, the very same creature the world had cast aside as dangerous, disposable. Claire dropped to her knees, ignoring the cold seeping through her jeans. Valor leaned against the gate, his big scarred head nudging her hand through the bars. Noah, sensing the weight of the moment in the way children sometimes do, silently crouched beside them. Ben watched them, tears carving raw tracks down his weathered face. "I'm dying," he said simply. "Matter of fact, stage 4. They told me a month, maybe 2. I came back to Montana to settle old debts. Never thought I'd find him again. Never thought I'd have the chance to say thank you." Claire could barely form words. "But you did," she whispered. "You found him," Ben nodded, but then his eyes grew distant, clouded by another thought. "I think," he said quietly, "it wasn't me he came back for." Claire stared at him, confusion wrinkling her brow. Ben smiled faintly, the ghost of a soldier who knew too much about the invisible wars people fought inside themselves. "He saved Jacob once," he murmured. "Maybe now he's here to save you." The world blurred around the edges as Claire fought the rising tide of emotion, because somehow, against all odds, in a world that so often forgot to cherish what mattered most, Valor had survived, had waited, had returned, not for glory, not for reward, but simply because love, real, raw, and unconditional, never truly forgot where it belonged. And for the first time in years, Claire realized she wasn't just witnessing a second chance. She was being given one, a chance to heal, a chance to believe again, a chance to let the past be a bridge, not a prison. As she wrapped her arms around Noah and Valor, pulling them close, Claire silently promised that this time she would not waste it, not ever again. The winter of Pine Ridge had always been merciless, but that night, the storm turned monstrous. The sky, once a soft gray, collapsed into a furious white, howling across the town like a wounded beast. Snow fell in thick sheets, blotting out the streets, the signs, even the familiar shapes of homes and trees. Pine Ridge was swallowed whole. Claire paced frantically by the front window, her heart slamming against her ribs. Noah was missing. One moment, he had been safe at school, coloring quietly under the watch of teachers who knew his delicate heart. The next, a frantic call, Noah had slipped away, unseen, into the brewing storm, and Claire knew, deep in the marrow of her bones, why. He was looking for Valor. She threw on her coat with shaking hands, barely registering the layers she pulled on. The world outside had become a spinning blur of white, but she didn't care. She stumbled out into it anyway, calling his name again and again, her voice tearing against the wind. "Noah!" Noah. Others joined, shelter volunteers, townsfolk who had grown to love the quiet boy and the Pitbull who had saved him in more ways than one. Searchlights pierced the swirling snow, voices echoed into the night, but the storm swallowed everything whole. Inside the shelter, Valor was frantic. He pawed at the gate, whining, teeth gnashing against the metal. Claire turned toward him, her heart breaking. She saw it in his eyes. He knew where Noah was. He could find him, but Valor was hurt. A limp from an old injury had worsened over the past few days. His side was bandaged, his breathing heavier than usual. Letting him out there would be reckless, maybe even fatal. Claire hesitated for a single heartbeat, and then she opened the gate. Valor bolted out like a bullet through the storm, nose to the ground, body low, a living flame against the freezing void. Claire stumbled after him, her boots sinking into the snow, but Valor moved with a desperate kind of grace that no human could match. He cut through drifts that came up to Claire's knees, vanishing into the blizzard. She could only pray he would not vanish forever. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Time had lost all meaning. Then, through the darkness, a shape emerged. It was Valor, and he was dragging something behind him. Claire ran forward, lungs burning, her legs numb from cold. When she reached them, she fell to her knees, sobbing. Noah. The boy was curled into a tight ball, his jacket pulled high over his ears, his face pale and unconscious. Valor had wrapped himself around Noah's tiny body, shielding him from the worst of the storm with nothing but his own battered frame. The Pitbull's sides heaved with exhaustion. his coat matted with ice and blood, but he refused to move. Even as Claire tried to lift Noah into her arms, Valor whimpered and pressed himself tighter against the boy, unwilling to let the cold take him. The rescue team arrived moments later, flashing lights dancing wildly against the snow. Medics rushed to take Noah, wrapping him in thermal blankets, checking his pulse, whispering words that Claire couldn't even process. Her whole world had shrunk to Valor, still lying there, his head resting near Noah's chest, his eyes half closed but watching, always watching. Claire pressed her forehead to Valor's and whispered, voice trembling, "You found him. You saved him." Valor gave the faintest wag of his tail, a flicker of life against the overwhelming cold. It was enough. Together, they loaded Noah into the ambulance. Claire bent down once more to Valor, who tried and failed to lift his heavy head. Tears blurred her vision as she gathered Valor into her arms as best she could. The Pitbull whimpered softly, his body broken but his spirit burning brighter than ever. He had kept his promise. He had protected Noah, even when the world turned deadly, even when every instinct must have begged him to turn back. Valor had forged forward, fueled not by commands, not by reward, but by the pure, unwavering loyalty that had always defined him. The ambulance doors slammed shut. Claire cradled Noah against her chest. Valor laid carefully across her lap, his breath weak but steady. As the sirens wailed into the night, Claire whispered a vow into the cold air. "You're not alone anymore. Neither of you." And as Pine Ridge slowly thawed from the storm's cruel grip, the people of the town would come to tell a story of a broken boy, a battered dog, and a love so fierce, so steadfast, that even the wildest blizzard could not break it. Valor's fight was not over when the blizzard cleared. For days, he battled through the long, dark hours of treatment at the veterinary hospital, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily like distant heartbeats in the silence. Claire visited him every morning and every night, sitting quietly by his side, reading from Noah's favorite books, whispering encouragement into his ear, as if her words could will him back to life. Noah, still frail but recovering steadily, would bring his crayon drawings, colorful depictions of a brown dog with a wide smile and a superhero cape, taping them gently to Valor's kennel walls. Against all odds, Valor survived. His recovery was slow and painful. Every step he took seemed to cost him more energy than he had. But he pressed forward, day after day. His spirit, it seemed, was stitched from the same unbreakable thread that had saved Noah in the storm. As news of the miraculous rescue spread across Pine Ridge, something extraordinary began to happen. The shelter's mailbox overflowed with letters. Some were scribbled in the shaky handwriting of children, others written in careful cursive by elderly townsfolk who remembered their own faithful dogs from decades past. Donations poured in from across the state. Blankets, food, medical supplies, handmade quilts bearing Valor's name stitched in gold thread arrived, as well as a brand new insulated doghouse. Though Claire had already made her decision, Valor was not going back to the shelter. He was coming home. At the next shelter board meeting, the normally stoic Martha stood before the gathering, her voice trembling as she held up a parchment certificate. Across the top, in bold, sweeping letters, it read, "Honorary Rescue Hero." With tears running freely down her cheeks, Martha knelt beside Valor, who was sitting tall and proud despite the visible tremor in his legs, and fastened a blue ribbon around his neck. "You saved our boy," she whispered. "You saved us all." Noah clapped enthusiastically, his face beaming with pride, while Claire covered her mouth to stifle her sobs. Valor wagged his tail once, a slow, steady beat that seemed to echo through the hall like the heartbeat of the whole town. Spring unfurled itself slowly over Pine Ridge, the snow giving way to fields of green and golden flowers nodding gently in the breeze. The scars left by the storm, broken fences, downed trees, shattered windows, were mended one by one, and among those rebuilding was a small family that had found their way back from the edge of despair. Claire finalized Valor's adoption on a bright Saturday morning, signing the papers with a hand that shook from something deeper than excitement. Something like reverence. "No more cages," she said softly, as she scratched behind Valor's ear. "You're home now. Forever." Valor leaned against her, sighing in contentment. Memorial Day came with clear skies and a brilliant sun overhead. The town gathered around the flag-draped podium in the square, where a small boy with dark hair and wide eyes stood nervously. Clutching a sheet of paper, Claire knelt behind him, whispering encouragement, while Valor sat at his side like a living sentinel. It was Noah's first public speech. He looked out at the crowd, friends, neighbors, strangers, and took a deep breath. "My dad was a hero," Noah began, his voice shaky but growing stronger with every word. "He taught me that being brave means helping others, even when you're scared. Valor taught me that too." The crowd held its breath. Noah smiled, looking down at the Pitbull who had once been called dangerous, broken, unworthy. "Today," Noah said, voice clear and proud, "I want to say thank you, not just to the soldiers, but to every hero who fights to protect the people they love, like Valor." He lifted his paper high in the air, words handwritten in crayon, "Live free, like a hero." The applause rose in waves, swelling, filling the air with something electric and raw and pure. Among the crowd, in a wheelchair under the shade of a great oak tree, sat Ben Carter. Though cancer had ravaged his body, leaving him little more than a whisper of the man he had once been, his smile that day was radiant. He watched Noah, watched Valor sitting proudly at the boy's side, and he closed his eyes, a soft sigh escaping his lips. Ben passed peacefully 3 days later, with the news of Noah's speech still echoing in his mind. His final words, spoken only to the nurse at his bedside, were simple. "They're gonna be just fine." Life, as it always does, moved forward. Claire and Noah planted a small garden behind their home. Sunflowers, daisies, and wild roses. Valor would often be found lying among the blooms, his graying muzzle lifted to the breeze, eyes closed, as if dreaming of places only he could see. But sometimes, late in the evening, Claire would sit on the porch with a cup of tea, watching Noah and Valor chase fireflies under the gathering stars, and she would remember how broken they had all been, how deep the darkness had seemed, how impossible to climb back to the light. Yet somehow, against all the odds, they had found their way home together, and in the end, that was the real miracle, not just surviving, but learning to live again, learning to trust, to laugh, to hope, because even the most shattered souls, dog, woman, boy, could heal, and even from the deepest scars, new life could bloom, just like Valor had shown them. As the snow melted and the flowers returned, a Pitbull once cast aside taught an entire town, and perhaps all of us, that broken hearts are still capable of extraordinary love. This story on Veil Marks is more than just about a dog or a family. It is about us, about hope, about the invisible threads that bind wounded souls together. As an old saying goes, where there is great love, there are always miracles. If Valor's journey touched your heart today, I invite you to leave a comment, share your thoughts, and subscribe to Veil Marks. Your support helps this small corner of light reach our dream of 1,000 subscribers and inspires me to create even more meaningful stories for you.